Jupiter Island in South Florida is a barrier sand island. This long, skinny island is protected by the plants that grow on the island. On one side towards the ocean are certain species of plants, and then on the inside, in the intercoastal waterways, are where all the mangrove forests live. The inlet here is just beautiful. It allows people to come in and out with their boats and go fishing. There's a bridge over to Jupiter Island. It goes over the top of the mangroves out to this barrier island that's just filled with little lagoons and all kinds of incredible habitat for marine life. Salt water flows in and out of these intercoastal waterways several times a day with the tide. The mangrove habitat has been on these islands for thousands of years, but over the past 20 years, a lot of the mangroves and the seagrass have died. This is really a big negative for the future of Jupiter Island. Mangroves are incredibly important habitat because they stabilize these sand islands so they don't wash away during a hurricane. And they're also habitat for thousands of species of marine life. It's a beautiful Jupiter Island lighthouse, and on one side of Jupiter Island you can see the sun come up and the other side the sun go down, both in the water. Jupiter Island is habitat for all kinds of endangered species, including this cute little gopher tortoise. These tortoises dig burrows in the sand, and these burrows then are habitat for a whole bunch of different species. These tortoises are protected under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. Osprey hunt up and down the waterways. All kinds of birds run around out in the mangrove forest and right in everyone's front yard. These are the beautiful white ibis. Mud hens hunt on the side of the riverbank. There's all kinds of wildlife that calls Jupiter Island home, including several species of herons that fish up and down these intercoastal waterways in the mangrove forest. The pelicans hunt for bait that comes in and out with the tide. This entire area is a natural wildlife area inhabited by a lot of people. The most beautiful part of Jupiter Island is below the surface. There are 5 large, extremely beautiful angelfish species that live in and around Jupiter Island. This one here is called a blue angelfish. They live out on the reefs, sometimes up to about 50, 60, 70 feet deep right offshore, but they come into the mangrove forest in the intercoastal waterways to lay their eggs, so the babies have a place where they can hide from predators. These angelfish are incredibly beautiful. This one's the queen angelfish. The nice thing about Jupiter Island area is the Gulf Stream comes all the way up from the Bahamas and the Caribbean and brings species with it like this French angelfish. So we have right there in Jupiter Island all kinds of marine life species that are common to Florida, but also common to the Bahamas. It's just a magical place to study marine life and go out diving or snorkeling with them. Even underneath the bridges and underneath the boat docks, you'll find schools of these gray angelfish and porkfish and so many different species. These fish feed primarily on algae and little invertebrates. The baby angelfish have exotic colors that look completely different than the adults. They hide in the seagrass and the algae in the mangrove forest that grows in the intercoastal waterway. These waterways are basically a nursery for baby fish and other types of marine life. They feed in the intercoastal waterways, but more important is they have the reef structure there and the mangroves that grow in the seagrass to hide in. There's even several species of angelfish they think are intergrades between blue angelfish and queen angelfish. This one's living in the same cave with a gigantic green moray eel. Diving in these intercoastal waterways, you may run into a fish that weighs 300 pounds or more. These are the giant grouper. They actually congregate right outside of the inlet at Jupiter Inlet every single year to breed. These big ones get 800 pounds. They're almost at one point in time fished to extinction. As you can see, they're incredibly tame and they're not have any fear of people whatsoever. They're just incredible to watch. This is one of the different species of grouper, the Nassau grouper. There's a number of different species of grouper that inhabit the Jupiter area. And a lot of them, again, have their babies in these intercoastal waterways. This is a funny looking batfish that doesn't swim, but it walks on its fins. These kind of critters are all over the place in the Jupiter Island area. These are the beautiful Atlantic spadefish and then the hogfish. The animals are super tame in the inlet, so you can dive and snorkel with them. The one thing that's very important again about Jupiter Island is where it's located and how the Gulf Stream comes closer to shore near Jupiter than anywhere on the eastern seaboard. That brings in massive amounts of fish and marine life, like these beautiful Spanish hogfish that you normally see down in the Bahamas. This is one of the cute little burrfish that live in the inlet. They live in real shallow water, and you can see they kind of have to hide in the seagrass, and they also find their food in the seagrass, just like this pufferfish does. So there's lots of species that live in the inlet where the tide changes back and forth very quickly, but there's a lot of seagrass that grows there, and they find their food hidden in the seagrass, little invertebrates, and they also hide in it, just like this seahorse. If the seagrass gets killed or is gone, all of these species are going to be dead. This is one of the giant morays that lives right underneath a boat dock in Jupiter Inlet. These are the scrawled filefish. You'll find them underneath the bridges. They feed on algae. They're real skinny fish. There's all kinds of big snappers that live out on the reef. The fishing's incredibly good there. That's the reason why. Because these big snappers, like these dog snappers, they have their babies and their eggs more often than not in the inlet in the intercoastal waterways. Big schools of grunts, these ones are called schoolmasters. They're always going in the same direction because they're swimming upstream when the current changes. You can tell which direction the current's flowing by which direction the fish are swimming. These are the beautiful porkfish. The Jupiter Inland area is basically like a huge marine aquarium. You can be snorkeling, poke your head into a cave, and there's a 300-pound fish looking back at you. That's why the entire area really needs to be protected, because there are so many babies that hatch out and grow in these intercoastal waterways that produces the fish that live out on the reef that you can go out and fish for. Huge schools of bait come in with the tide underneath the boat docks and underneath the piers and in the mangrove forest. These bait obviously feed a lot of other bigger fish. So Jupiter Island and Jupiter Inlet area is basically a fish factory for fish that live up and down the coastline. 6 different species of parrotfish live in this area. The males normally have the more of the green and blue colors. The females are more red and yellow. The males actually used to be females. All parrotfish, they're a type of wrasse, are hatched out as females. When they get older, some of the females convert into males. This is a cute looking porgy fish that'll come right up and look right into the camera. These animals have had for thousands of years the inland mangrove forest to lay their eggs in, which has helped them survive and to have these kind of quantities of fish. like this really cool scrawled cowfish. This is one of the beautiful little squirrel fish that comes out at nighttime. You don't see them during the day too much. This is one of the goofiest looking fish. This one's called a flying gurnard. And when they walk actually on the seafloor, but if you scare them, they put out their fins and fly. This one's a little drumfish. There are literally thousands of species of fish in these intercoastal waterways, including these gigantic 500 to 600 pound tarpon that literally live right underneath people's boat docks. They come out at nighttime and they feed on small fish. Huge schools of jacks come in and out of the inlet. There's 3 different species of jacks here. And then the big blackjack lives out on the reef in the caves. There are porkfish all over the place. You'll see the little babies in the inlet, and then you'll see the big ones out on the reef. This is a really mellow, tame, very cool nurse sharks. They're super harmless to people. They won't bother you at all. And they come right into the inlet and they'll sleep right underneath everybody's boat dock. They eat conch shells and crabs and sea urchins by crushing them with their strong jaws. This is a margot fish that lives inside the caves on the outer reef, but their babies grow in the inside intracoastal waterways. Huge schools of snook. These snook get 3 to 4 feet long, live in the inlet at Jupiter. Sometimes I'll be scuba diving with these, and there's literally so many you can't count them. They hide in the mangrove forest. They come in and out of the inlet with the tide, and they feed on the massive amount of small baitfish. This is just an absolutely magical place to snorkel and scuba dive, and the amount of fish there is absolutely stunning. But that can all change very quickly if the mangrove forest perishes. These are the 9-armed starfish. There's cushion starfish, which are also called sea stars. They line the bottom out there. Sometimes you'll see 100 of them in an hour. This is a horse conch that was crawling around underneath one of the boat docks, and this really cool looking 8-inch wide box crab. It's one of the funniest looking crabs I think that ever existed, and they're hard as a rock. They live in the seagrass. They feed on the grass and they hide in it. These are the hermit crabs. These crabs can literally get up to 2 to 3 pounds, and those claws are as big as your wrist. They can pinch incredibly hard. This is one of the many lobsters that lives in the inlet. So what the lobsters do, they live out on the reef, the real big ones, but they come into the inlet to lay their eggs, and then the babies live in the mangrove forest. This is the really cool looking horseshoe crab. These crabs at one period of time, hundreds of years ago, or even 20, 30 years ago, were incredibly common along the eastern seaboard, but now there's very few of them left, and Jupiter Inlet's one of their homes. They crawl around on the seafloor and they look for little invertebrates and crabs and other different types of things to feed on. They have blue blood. This is one of the really neat upside down jellyfish that lives in the lagoon area. And then sponges that live all over the reef. These sponges actually are incredibly good for the environment because they filter and clean the water. Jupiter Island is home to 4 different species of sea turtles. These sea turtles breed offshore out on the reef in deeper water, and then they come up and lay their eggs at nighttime up on the sandy beach that surrounds Jupiter Island. Turtles travel thousands of miles from out at the sea all the way from the Caribbean and the Bahamas to lay their eggs on the very same beach of which they hatched on. These are the green sea turtles, which are the most common, and then the hawksbill turtle that has more of a pointed beak and rougher edges to the shells. These turtles feed on algae, seaweed, bits of sponges and little invertebrates that grow on the reef. These sea turtles can live to be over 100 years old, and it takes almost 20 years for them to mature before they can lay their eggs. When they hatch, they leave the beach and go out to sea, of which they live way out in deep water for about the first 5 years of their life before coming back to shore as a sub-adult. Turtles that nest on the beaches here in Jupiter Island are tracked by a nonprofit scientific group, so they know how many eggs are laid and how many nests there are up and down the coastline. But the beaches are decreasing in size due to sea level rise and construction. Here you can see the big holes left in the sand after the sea turtles have crawled up on the beach at night and laid their eggs. The big problem here is that rising sea levels are deteriorating the beaches on a yearly basis. The sea turtles need to have a big sandy beach to lay their eggs because they have to dig a hole down deep enough to get to the right temperature and humidity for the babies to hatch. Then the females cover up the eggs with sand. But due to the rising sea levels, a lot of the beach is gone, and the surf digs up all the eggs out onto the sand. The other problem is construction. They're still building homes and condominiums right on the beach, not allowing the turtles to have a proper nesting area. When the eggs are exposed like this from underneath the sand, then they get exposed to the salt water, which kills the egg. So once again, these eggs have to remain 4 to 5 feet deep where they have the right temperature and the right humidity to hatch. As you can see here, just the rising sea levels have deteriorated over half of the beach where the turtles used to lay their eggs at. So some of these sea turtles are coming back at 20, 30 years old to where they were hatched at, and they lay their eggs on the beach, and the eggs get destroyed almost immediately by the surf. The eggs also get eaten by all types of predators, from armadillos to birds. It's basically just a turtle massacre of eggs up and down the beach on Jupiter Island right now. We really have to take sea level rise into consideration if we want to have sea turtles in the future, because the beaches need to retreat back inland so the turtles have a proper place to lay their eggs. You can see here the beach is littered with dead turtle eggs and plastic. The turtles simply can't get back up the beach far enough to lay their eggs now, which is going to be incredibly detrimental to the future of the sea turtles in the Florida, Caribbean, and Bahama areas. The other big problem is they're still building condominiums and homes right on the beach. This tractor here in Jupiter is digging down underneath some of the very remaining live sea turtle nests that's right out on the beach. And now the sea level rise has uncovered this massive seawall that goes out all the way underneath the beach. The turtles used to nest on the sand that was on top of the seawall. Now they don't have anywhere to nest at all. So the rising sea levels and the illegal construction that's still happening on the beach is a huge problem for the future of our sea turtles. These seawalls may have been placed years ago, but they need to be removed so the turtles can once again have a place to lay their eggs. And then these buildings need to be set way back so there's a much bigger beach for the turtles to lay their eggs on. These seawalls are so destructive because the waves hit the seawall and bounce off the seawall back into the ocean and tear out the very last remaining sand that was there for the sea turtles to build their nest in. These seawalls are also very destructive to anyone trying to walk down the beach on Jupiter Island. You can see how the ricocheted waves go right off the seawall and tear out the sand. And it's actually dangerous just to walk your dog down this beach. There is nowhere left for these sea turtles to lay their eggs. Other sea turtle species like the leatherback sea turtle and the loggerhead sea turtle are extremely rare, protected, endangered species. But they're getting run over by boats and having their heads chopped off and their backs all cut up. Just look at all of the federal laws that are being violated right now on a daily basis in Jupiter Island.
The U.S. Endangered Species Act of 1973 makes it a federal offense for any person subject to the jurisdiction of the United States to take any endangered or threatened species. The term take means to harass, harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, or collect, or to attempt to engage in any such conduct. Harass is defined as an intentional or negligent act or omission which creates the likelihood of injury to wildlife by annoying, to such an extent as to significantly disrupt normal behavior patterns, which include, but are not limited to, breeding, feeding, or sheltering. The Secretary shall by regulation promulgated in accordance with subsection B, determine whether any species is an endangered species or a threatened species because of any of the following factors. A. The present or threatened destruction, modification, or curtailment of its habitat or range. B. Overutilization for commercial, recreational, scientific, or educational purposes. C. Disease or predation. D. The inadequacy of existing regulatory mechanisms, or E. Other natural or man-made factors affecting its continued existence. Construction of a large structure on the beach with seawalls covering the sand likely violates the Endangered Species Act by eliminating a sea turtle nesting sites and actually destroying turtle eggs.
Another huge problem around Jupiter Island is the out-of-control boating activities. Literally hundreds of boats every day speed up and down these intracoastal waterways in speeds in excess of 30 miles an hour. In many parts of Florida, there are no wake zones. This keeps the boats going slow so they don't run into animals like sea turtles and manatee, and they also don't destroy the mangrove habitat and the seabeds that the animals feed on. But here in Jupiter, that's not the case. There are so many boats zooming back and forth, it makes it dangerous just to be in the water if you're a swimmer or a paddler. But on top of that, they're all violating the Federal Endangered Species Act. These intracoastal waterways are habitat for the protected species like the manatee. The manatee feed on the seagrass, but these boat wakes tear the seagrass out so there's no food left for the manatees to eat. These boat wakes also are destroying the mangrove forest. On the right side of the screen, you see these little mangrove islands, but these islands used to be all connected a few years ago and up and down the entire waterway. The boats are causing an incredible destruction to the habitat of our endangered species here in Jupiter Island. There's boat parties that happen every weekend and they throw their anchors overboard, and that kills the seagrass that the protected manatee has to feed on. The entire area now is really open to be devastated by a hurricane, because when the mangroves are ripped out from the water, they don't stabilize the sand anymore, and a hurricane can be much more damaging. These boat wakes go right across the sandbar right now that used to be a mangrove forest. This area here used to have hundreds of seahorses. It had 10 to 15 giant 2,000-pound manatee every day that came in and ate the seagrass, but the seagrass is all gone now. This is all a violation of federal law, but the federal government isn't here in Jupiter Island to enforce the law. These mangroves are incredibly important to stabilize the coastline from hurricanes. They absorb carbon to offset the effects of climate change. They grow upwards very quickly to offset the climate change that's causing some of the sea level rise. The boat wakes are just destroying these mangrove forests. These mangroves simply cannot live in a surf zone, and that's why they live in the intracoastal waterway and not out on the beach. The boats are causing all kinds of erosion on the shore bank and shoreline there, which causes a problem for the gopher tortoises because they're losing the area where they lay their eggs. The boat wakes come in, they bounce off of other boats, they bounce off of the bank there, which causes it to erode, they kill the mangroves. They're so detrimental to the entire ecosystem here in Jupiter Island. Where these boats are parked right now used to be a mangrove forest and used to be incredibly important habitat for the threatened manatee to feed in. Just listen to the wording of the U.S. Endangered Species Act, and you can see where these violations are happening every single day, including they throw trash overboard. These boats have a huge negative effect to the environment here in Jupiter Island, which just happens to be protected environment under the U.S. Endangered Species Act.
The Endangered Species Act forms the basis for the federal protection of threatened plants, insects, fish and wildlife. The Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service administer the Endangered Species Act on behalf of the United States. Manatee are listed as a threatened species under the Federal Endangered Species Act. It is illegal to take, harass or harm a manatee. The ESA imposes a maximum criminal penalty of $50,000 and/or 1 year in jail against anyone knowingly engaging in a take.
Manatee are huge, slow-moving mammals, also known as sea cows, and they've lived in the Jupiter Island waterways for thousands of years. They feed in the shallow water on seagrass that grows on the seafloor in the intercoastal waterways, right below where all of these boats are speeding. These boats are hitting and killing the manatee. The manatee is a threatened species on the Endangered Species Act, so it's completely illegal to harm a manatee or their habitat. I contacted the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service several times in Florida to file a complaint and show the video and pictures of the speeding boats hitting and killing manatee, but they have failed to even get back to me and want to talk about it. Out of 14 manatee that I observed in one day while I was out snorkeling and scuba diving, 11 of them had massive propeller wounds. As you can see, these gentle giants cruise in the water very, very, very slowly. They're very methodical, they're very peaceful, and they simply don't have the ability to get out of the way of these speeding boats. And that's what the federal laws are supposed to protect animals like this. The boats have torn up all the seagrass that the manatees feed on, so nonprofits have to feed them lettuce during the wintertime so they can survive.
The intracoastal waterway around Jupiter Island, Florida, is a known habitat for the threatened manatee, threatened green sea turtle, and a threatened seagrass species. Speeding boats harm manatees by killing and injuring them with their propellers. The wakes from these craft erode the sandbars that root seagrass, the manatee's primary food source, as well as disturbing the mangrove roots. Boat parties dropping anchor, and a lot of trash in the sand also degrade this sensitive habitat. The ESA specifies these actions to be considered a take of these 3 threatened species.
boats traveling fast enough to hit or kill a manatee, irrelevant of any posted speed limit sign, are still in violation of the Federal Endangered Species Act. It is simply just illegal to run into, harm, kill, or take a manatee or damage the manatee habitat. I have been so frustrated at all of these boats speeding by in this protected manatee habitat that I contacted the state of Florida to try to get them to come out and enforce the U.S. Endangered Species Act. I contacted the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, and I also contacted the Florida Department of the EPA. I have done this many times over by phone and by email, and all of these agencies, every single one I've contacted, has refused to come out and stop these speeding boats from damaging the manatee in their habitat.
The citizens of the USA are designated as stewards of these endangered species, not the government. And so it is up to us to protect them. People can have nice boats and homes on the intracoastal waterways in Florida while keeping our endangered manatee and sea turtles safe by operating boats in a safe manner and respecting all of the amazing wildlife we share this sensitive environment with. Simply operating boats in a safe and sane manner until out to sea will protect the sensitive mangrove habitat we all need to survive.
We travel together, passengers on a tiny spaceship, dependent upon its vulnerable reserves of water, air and soil. All committed for our safety to its security and peace, preserved from annihilation only by care, the work, and, I will say, the love we give our fragile craft. We cannot maintain it half fortunate, half miserable, half confident, half despairing, half slave to the ancient enemies of man, half free in the liberation of resources undreamed of until this day. No craft, no crew can travel safely with such vast contradictions. On their resolution depends the survival of us all. Any citizen of the USA has the legal right under the ESA to sue the federal government for lack of enforcement. The ESA provides for citizen suits seeking injunctive relief. The citizens' suits provision has, by any measure, been the most widely used and effective weapon for enforcing the ESA. A citizen suit enjoins the U.S. government and other agencies who are alleged to be in violation of the Endangered Species Act or its implementation of regulations. 60-day notice requirement. Citizens are required to give written notice to the government. And, in actions under subsection A, to alleged violator, at least 60 days before they commence their suit. What this means is when the federal or state government fails to enforce the ESA, the public can sue the government and have a judge order the government to enforce the law. Before suing the government, the public needs to show in a 60-day notice where the ESA is not being enforced and endangered or threatened wildlife is in imminent harm. We will be filing a 60-day notice soon if the United States Fish and Wildlife Service does not come to Jupiter Island, Florida, and enforce the ESA to protect the threatened sea turtles, seagrass and manatee and their habitat. For information about how to file your own 60-day notice, please contact the legal team at underwater2web@gmail.com.